In the early hours of May 17, 2026, more than 500 Ukrainian drones tore through the night sky over Moscow. Russia's own defense ministry later admitted to shooting down over 1,054 drones in 24 hours, the largest aerial assault on the Russian capital since the Second World War. 4 rings of air defense, S-400 missile systems, Pantsir IS-1 batteries, electronic warfare units. Everything Putin spent 2 decades building to make Moscow untouchable. All of it failed in a single night. The Gazprom-owned Moscow oil refinery burned. Sheremetyevo Airport, the largest in Russia, ground to a halt. 12 workers were wounded at the refinery gates. Russian air defense in blind panic fired into the night and showered debris on its own civilians. And within 24 hours, the Kremlin did something no one expected. They begged. Tonight we break down how Putin's untouchable fortress shattered in a single weekend and why the cracks are now permanent. For 20 years, Moscow was supposed to be untouchable. When Vladimir Putin came to power in 2001, of his earliest priorities was the construction of what Russian state media called the most sophisticated air defense umbrella on Earth. 4 concentric rings of protection surrounding the capital, the outermost ring extending hundreds of kilometers into the surrounding oblasts, the innermost ring sitting directly on top of the Kremlin itself. This network was not a bluff. It was real, and it was expensive. At the outer edge, long-range S-400 Triumph systems, each battery costing roughly $500 million, capable of engaging targets at 400 kilometers. Behind them, the medium-range S-300 batteries, Cold War workhorses upgraded over decades. Inside those, the Pantsir S-1 short-range systems combining missiles and 30mm cannons for last-ditch interception. And finally, electronic warfare units saturating the airspace with jamming signals designed to blind incoming missiles. Russian military doctrine treated this system as sacred. State television ran documentaries praising it. Defense minister speeches called Moscow the most protected city on Earth. When Putin held his annual Victory Day parade on May 9, 2026, the formation flew over Red Square as proof of Russian technological supremacy. Then there was Gazprom, the state-controlled energy giant, the single most important pillar of Putin's economic power. Gazprom Neft's Moscow oil refinery sits in the Kapotnya district in the southeast of the capital. It processes approximately 245,000 barrels of oil per day. It supplies roughly 40% of all fuel consumed in the greater Moscow region. It is owned by the same conglomerate that funds the Kremlin's foreign policy, that pays the salaries of the people closest to Putin, that has been described by analysts as Russia's geopolitical sword and shield, and it sits less than 30 kilometers from the Kremlin's walls. Add to this the Elma Technology Park in Zelenograd, 60,000 square meters of secure manufacturing space, 150 corporate residents, microelectronics, optical systems, military-grade radio components, robotics, the technological heart of Russia's drone and missile production, a facility that had been struck once in May 2025 and had only just recovered. Then add Sheremetyevo, Russia's largest international airport, the symbolic gateway to Moscow, over 40 million passengers a year before the war. And in occupied Crimea, the Belbek Airfield Command and Control Hub of the Black Sea Fleet host to Pantsir S-2 systems and S-400 radar hangars, the nerve center for Russian aerial operations across the southern theater. This was the fortress. This was the empire Putin had built. And for years, Western analysts said the same thing. Ukraine cannot reach Moscow. The defenses are too dense. The distance is too far. The technology is too primitive. That was the consensus. Even after Ukrainian drones began hitting refineries in Krasnodar and Ryazan in 2023, even after strikes on Belgorod and Kursk in 2024, even after the Engels airbase fires, the capital itself, the inner sanctum, was supposed to remain inviolable. Putin himself believed this. So much so that on May 9, 2026, just 8 days before everything changed, he told reporters that the Russia-Ukraine war is coming to an end. On May 12th, his spokesman Dmitry Peskov declared that Russia was open to dialogue only if Kyiv accepted Russian terms, full Ukrainian withdrawal from the Donetsk Oblast, recognition of annexations, and a public surrender of Ukrainian sovereignty claims. The arrogance was almost theatrical. The fortress was intact. Gazprom was burning oil for the war machine. Moscow's skyline was unmarked. The 4 rings stood unbroken. Then came the night of May 16th. To understand what happened in the early hours of May 17th, you have to start 3 days earlier. On May 13th and 14th, Russian forces launched what the Ukrainian Air Force confirmed was the largest sustained aerial bombardment of Ukraine since the full-scale invasion began. 1,567 drones, 56 missiles, Kinzhal hypersonic missiles flying 10 times the speed of sound. The target was Kyiv. At 1 in the morning on May 14th, a Russian cruise missile slammed into a 9-story apartment building in the Darnitsia district. 24 people died, including 3 teenagers, children born in 2008, 2010, and 2013. 48 more were wounded. Emergency workers dug through concrete for over a day. The intercept rate told its own story. Ukraine shot down 94% of incoming drones, but only 7% of the missiles. The Patriot interceptor shortage, painfully documented over months, had finally produced its consequence. President Volodymyr Zelensky did not wait for Western permission. He instructed Ukraine's defense forces to prepare a response using domestically produced weapons. No requests to Washington, no coordination with NATO capitals, no diplomatic caveats. The exact words attributed to him: their state must end this war. 48 hours later, the Russian capital saw what that meant. The strike began in coordinated waves. Ukrainian Security Service operatives, the SBU, partnered with the armed forces of Ukraine to launch the operation. According to confirmed reporting from the Kyiv Independent and the Kyiv Post, the targets in Moscow Oblast included the sanctioned Angstrom plant manufacturing semiconductors for the Russian military-industrial complex, the Moscow oil refinery in Kapotnya, the Solnechnogorsk fuel pumping station near the village of Durykino, and the Volodarskoye fuel pumping station. In occupied Crimea, the same operation simultaneously targeted a Pantsir S-2 air defense system, a hangar with S-400 radar equipment, Orion and 4-post drone control systems, a ground-to-air data transmission point, and an air traffic control tower at Belbek Airfield. The drones traveled more than 500 kilometers, over 300 miles, through some of the most concentrated air defenses on Earth. And they got through. Verified geolocation data and eyewitness footage published by independent Russian telegram channels, including Astra and Exilanova, plus confirmed that multiple strike munitions passed through both the Pantsir and S-400 defensive layers. The 4 rings, the rings that Putin's regime had spent 20 years celebrating, failed in real time. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin was forced to confirm the damage on his official telegram channel within hours. The primary target, he acknowledged, was the Moscow oil refinery in Kapotnya. 12 workers were injured. Most were construction crews near the refinery's entrance gate. Black smoke billowed from the facility for hours. Footage shared across X by users, including Anton Gerashenko, showed flames rising from the Kapotnya complex in a way that could be seen from kilometers away. At the Elma Technology Park in Zelenograd, cross-referenced video footage shot from Sosnovaya Alley confirmed a large-scale fire inside the secure facility. The Solnechnogorsk oil storage station near Durykino burned for over 8 hours, with Russian independent outlet J in Kyiv reporting the fires were still spreading the next day. Debris from a Ukrainian drone fell near Sheremetyevo Airport's 3rd runway. Over 200 flights were delayed or canceled. Russia's largest airport ground to a halt. But the most damning evidence came from Moscow's own air defense. In the chaos of the night, Russian Pantsir and S-300 batteries firing blind into the dark sky sent fragments of their own missiles and intercepted drone debris raining down on Moscow's residential districts. A woman was killed when wreckage hit her home in Khimki, just northwest of the capital. 2 men died in Pogorelki and Mytishchi. 4 buildings were destroyed in Sergiev Posad. At least 17 civilians were wounded, many of them by debris from Russia's own air defense intercepts. Russian state media tried to spin this. They claimed all the damage to civilian buildings was caused by Ukrainian drone debris. But verified footage from multiple independent Russian telegram channels showed Pantsir tracer rounds arcing into apartment buildings. The truth was almost too perfect. Putin's air defense, in panic, had killed Russian civilians while failing to protect Gazprom's refinery. Then came the response. Russia's Ministry of Defense, the same institution that had spent years bragging about its layered protection of Moscow, was forced to issue a press release claiming it had intercepted 1,054 Ukrainian drones in 24 hours. They wanted the number to sound impressive. Instead, it confirmed something else entirely. The scale of the Ukrainian operation, the volume of munitions in the air over Russia, the fact that even by Russia's own count, this was the largest single Ukrainian strike package of the entire war. The Institute for the Study of War, the most respected open-source assessment organization in the West, issued its verdict the same day. Ukraine's May 16th to 17th strike series proved that Russia continues to be unable to effectively defend the Russian capital, a weakness that generated significant frustration in the Russian ultranationalist information space. In plain English, the empire could not protect its own throne, and the people who once cheered Putin loudest were now turning on him. The consequences arrived in 4 waves: military, economic, political, and social. Military consequence first. The Moscow strike was not an isolated event. It was part of a sustained Ukrainian long-range strike campaign that had in the preceding 96 hours alone hit the Novinomaysky Azot chemical plant in Stavropol Krai, one of Russia's largest producers of nitric acid for high-explosive artillery shells, the Astrakhan gas processing facility where motor fuel assembly lines were halted, the Rosneft oil refinery in Ryazan, which produced what locals described as toxic black rain falling on the city, the Tuapse refinery on the Black Sea coast where satellite imagery confirmed fires visible from orbit. Russia's oil and chemical infrastructure was being systematically dismantled. The cumulative effect was already showing up in price data. Russian wholesale gasoline prices climbed for the 3rd consecutive week. Refinery throughput, according to industry tracking sources cited by Bloomberg, was running 10 to 15% below seasonal norms. Then came the economic consequence. Gazprom Neft is not just a company. It is, in the words of multiple Western analysts, the operational treasury of the Russian war economy. Roughly 40% of Moscow's fuel supply runs through Kapotnya. The refinery's daily output of 245,000 barrels feeds the trucking networks that move military supplies to Belgorod and Kursk. It fuels the construction equipment building fortifications across occupied Donetsk. It powers the heating systems of Moscow's elite districts in winter. When Kapotnya burns, the costs cascade through the entire Russian war machine. The Sheremetyevo disruption was symbolic, but its economic message was sharp. Over 200 flights delayed. International business travelers stranded. The signal to global capital was unmistakable. Russia was no longer a safe operating environment, but the political consequence is where Putin truly lost. Within 24 hours of the strike on May 17th, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov did something extraordinary. Speaking to Russian propagandist Pavel Zarubin with the smoke from Kapotnya still rising over Moscow, Peskov said this: "The active discussion of this topic, the shift toward understanding that at some point they will have to speak with the Russians, is good." Read those words again. The same Kremlin that had spent months demanding Ukrainian capitulation. The same spokesman who just 5 days earlier had insisted Ukraine must withdraw from Donetsk before any negotiations could begin. Now publicly hoping for what he called a practical approach to dialogue with Europe. The shift was not subtle, it was a confession. The Kremlin's official position changed in less than 24 hours after Ukrainian drones reached Moscow. And the social consequence, the one Putin fears most, arrived through his own propaganda apparatus. Russian mill blogger Yegor Guzenko, known by the alias 13th, publicly criticized the Kremlin's response. He mocked the regime's decision to shut down mobile internet across Moscow as ineffective in curbing Ukrainian strikes. Other pro-war Russian telegram channels, the same accounts that had once cheered every Russian missile strike on Kyiv, were openly demanding a unified air defense network and an early warning system around the capital. Implicit in their criticism, the existing system had failed catastrophically. The Institute for the Study of War noted that the Kremlin was now increasing its efforts to censor reactions to Ukrainian strikes against Moscow City, suggesting that it is growing concerned about its inability to protect the Russian rear. This is what regime collapse looks like in slow motion. Not tanks in the streets, not generals storming the Kremlin, but the loyalists turning their knives, slowly the propaganda machine choking on its own contradictions, the spokesman begging for dialogue, while the state media still claims victory. And on the human level, for the Ukrainian families burying their 24 dead in Kyiv that same week, for the parents of the 3 teenagers killed in the Darnitsia apartment block, for the rescue workers who pulled bodies from concrete for over 30 hours, this was something they had been told was impossible. That Russia would always have the strategic depth advantage, that Moscow was untouchable, that Ukrainian retaliation could never reach the heart of the empire. Volodymyr Zelensky said it best in his evening address. His words were not triumphalist, they were forensic. Our long-range capabilities are significantly changing the situation, and more broadly, the world's perception of Russia's war. Many partners are now signaling that they see what is happening and how everything has changed. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky added his own assessment the same evening. The momentum on the front lines, he confirmed, had shifted. Ukrainian forces in February 2026 had captured more territory than Russian troops. The pattern was holding through April and May. The strike on Moscow was not a stunt. It was confirmation of a trajectory, and the trajectory for Putin points only one direction: down. In April 1942, 4 months after Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle led 16 B-25 bombers off the deck of the USS Hornet and struck Tokyo. The physical damage was modest. The strategic damage was minimal. The casualties were small, but the psychological damage to the Japanese Empire was incalculable. The myth of the untouchable home islands shattered overnight. Japanese high command panicked, recalled fighter squadrons from the Pacific frontier to defend the home islands. Resources were redirected. Naval planning was rewritten. Within 6 weeks of the Doolittle Raid, Imperial Japan lost the Battle of Midway and the strategic initiative of the entire Pacific War. Historians today agree on a simple truth. The Doolittle Raid did not destroy Tokyo. It destroyed the lie that Tokyo could not be touched. What Ukraine did to Moscow on the night of May 16 and 17, 2026 is the same kind of strike. The physical damage to Kapotnya, to Zelenograd, to Sheremetyevo, to the Solnechny-Gorsk terminal, it is significant, but it is recoverable. Gazprom will repair its refinery. Russian air defense will redeploy. The fires will eventually be put out. But the myth is gone, and myths once destroyed do not return. Putin spent 20 years building the lie that Moscow was beyond Ukraine's reach. He spent 4 years of full-scale war telling his population that the front lines were far away, that the war was a distant matter, that Russian civilians were safe in their capital. That lie ended on May 17th, ended publicly, ended in front of the entire world, ended on the official telegram channel of the mayor of Moscow himself. The 4 rings failed. Gazprom burned. Sheremetyevo went dark. The Kremlin begged for dialogue within 24 hours. The mill bloggers turned. The censors panicked. The air defense killed its own civilians while protecting nothing of strategic value. Russia did not just lose a battle that night. Russia lost the strategic argument it has been making since February 2022, that it can outlast Ukraine, that it can outproduce Ukraine, that it can withstand any cost Ukraine imposes. The drones that reached Moscow proved otherwise. Ukraine can now impose costs anywhere in European Russia at any time on any target. And there is no defense that has been demonstrated to reliably stop them. When Putin watches the smoke rise from Kapotnya, he is not watching a refinery burn. He is watching the strategic premise of his entire war disintegrate in real time. So here is the question we want you to think about. After Moscow burned, after Peskov begged for dialogue in 24 hours, after the mill bloggers turned on Putin, after the 4 rings of defense failed publicly, does Vladimir Putin have any path left to a victory he can sell to his own people? Or has he already lost the war and just doesn't know how to say it out loud yet? Drop your answer in the comments below. We read everyone. If this analysis gave you a clearer picture of what just happened over Moscow, hit that like button to help the algorithm push this video to more people who need to see it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown, because if the last 72 hours tell us anything, this story is moving fast. This is where the war turns. We'll see you in the next analysis.